When I meet somebody who claims to be religious, my first impulse is don't believe you. I don't believe you until you tell me, do you really believe, for example, if they say they're Catholic, do you really believe that when a priest blesses a wafer, it turns into the body of Christ? Are you seriously telling me you believe that? Are you seriously saying that wine turns into blood? Mock them, ridicule them. In public. Don't fall for the convention that we're all too polite to talk about religion. Religion is not off the table. Religion is not off limits. Religion makes specific claims about the universe which need to be substantiated and need to be challenged and, if necessary, need to be ridiculed with contempt.
What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
What if after you died you ran into God? He said, what have you been doing, Richard? I mean, what have you been doing? I've been trying to be nice to you. Yeah. I gave you a multi-million-dollar paycheck over and over again with your book, and look what you did.
The bio I'm about to read you is from the Discovery Institute in Seattle. David Berlinski received his PhD in philosophy from Princeton University and was later a postdoctoral fellow in mathematics and molecular biology at Columbia University. He's currently a senior fellow at Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. Dr. Berlinski has authored works on systems analysis, differential topology, theoretical biology, analytic philosophy, and the philosophy of mathematics, as well as 3 novels. He's also taught philosophy, mathematics, and English at such universities as Stanford, Rutgers, the City University of New York, and the University of Paris. In addition, he has held research fellowships in Austria and France. I just got to say, I'm very happy at this point as the series is closing. We just have a few installments left, and at this point I get to lean on books like this one by Dr. Berlinski, The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. This book is awesome. I recommend that everyone read it. It just eviscerates the evolutionists. The following are excerpts from David Berlinski's amazing book, The Devil's Delusion. I am a secular Jew. My religious education did not take. I can barely remember a word of Hebrew. I cannot pray. I've spent more years than I care to remember in studying mathematics and writing about the sciences. Yet the book that follows is, in some sense, a defense of religious thought and sentiment. Biblical verses are the least of it. A defense is needed because none has been forthcoming. The discussion has been ceded to men who regard religious belief with frivolous contempt. Their books have in recent years poured from every press, and although differing widely in their style, they're identical in their message. Because scientific theories are true, religious beliefs must be false. Harris has conveyed the point by entitling an essay, "Science Must Destroy Religion." His call to jihad cannot be long delayed. No scientific theory touches on the mysteries that the religious tradition addresses. A man asking why his days are short and full of suffering is not disposed to turn to algebraic quantum field theory for the answer. The answers that prominent scientific figures have offered are remarkable in their shallowness. The hypothesis that we're nothing more than cosmic accidents has been widely accepted by the scientific community. Occupied by their own concerns, a great many men and women have a dull, hurt, angry sense of being oppressed by the sciences. They are frustrated by endless scientific boasting. They suspect that, as an institution, the scientific community holds them in contempt. They feel no little distaste for those speaking in its name. They are right to feel this way. I have written this book for them. With the rise of what the Wall Street Journal has called militant atheism, both the terms of the debate and the climate of opinion have changed. The sunny agnosticism characteristic of men who believed that, with respect to God, it could go either way, is no longer in fashion. It is regarded as rather dim. It has been the scientists, Richard Dawkins, Victor Stenger, and others, who have undertaken a wide-ranging attack on religious belief and sentiment. Richard Dawkins, the author of The God Delusion, is in this respect outstanding. He is not only an intellectually fulfilled atheist, he is determined that others should be as full as he is. These views are important because they invoke for their authority the power and the glory of the Western scientific tradition. The title of Victor Stenger's recent book is God, the Failed Hypothesis: How Science Shows that God Does Not Exist. Stenger is a professor of physics. He may have written the book, but it is science, we are to understand, that has provided the requisite demonstration. Like a 19th century spirit medium, Stenger has simply taken dictation. Christopher Hitchens affirmed his willingness to defer to the world's smart scientists on any matter more exigent than finger counting. He is presently persuaded that, quote, religion poisons everything. His book is entitled God is Not Great, and within its pages he has managed to convey his contempt for religious thought by propositions exhibiting a positively oriental degree of evasiveness. Does any of this represent anything more than yet another foolish intellectual fad? A successor to academic Marxism, feminism, or various doctrines of multicultural tranquility? Not in the world in which religious beliefs overflow into action. For Islamic radicals, the sword is more telling than the book, as the Arab poet Abu Tamam wrote with menacing authority some 800 years ago. The advent of militant atheism marks a reaction, a lurid but natural reaction, to the violence of the Islamic world. Quote, we take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, the geneticist Richard Lewontin remarked equably in the New York Review of Books, quote, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories. Why should any discerning man or woman take the side of science or anything else under these circumstances? It's because, Lewontin explains, quote, we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. If nothing else, the attack on traditional religious thought marks the consolidation in our time of science as the single system of belief in which rational men and women might place their faith. and if not their faith, then certainly their devotion. From cosmology to biology, its narratives have become the narratives. They are, these narratives, immensely seductive, so much so that looking at them with innocent eyes requires a very deliberate act. And like any militant church, this one places a familiar demand before all others. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Cosmology studies the universe as a whole, and quantum cosmology brings the apparatus of quantum mechanics to bear on the whole of the universe. It's the most speculative of inquiries, and it is among the least successful. Considering the cosmological argument, the physicist Victor Stenger scoffs that it is the last resort of the theist who seeks to argue for the existence of God from science, and finds all his other arguments fail. Quote, "We can give a plausible scientific reason based on our best current knowledge of physics that something is more natural than nothing." Having begun with Stenger, I might as well finish him off. Quote, "Another universe that existed prior to ours tunneled through to become our universe. Critics will argue that we have no way of observing such an earlier universe, and so this is not very scientific." End quote. This is true. Critics will do just that. Before they do, they'll certainly observe that Stenger has completely misunderstood the terms of the problem, and that far from showing how something can arise from nothing, he has shown only that something might arise from something else. This is not an observation that has ever evoked a firestorm of controversy. The sea of indeterminate potentiality and all other cognate concepts belong to a group of physical arguments with two aims. The first is to find a way around the initial singularity of standard Big Bang cosmology. Physicists accept this aim devoutly because the Big Bang singularity strikes an uncomfortably theistic note. Nothing but intellectual mischief can result from leaving that singularity where it is. Who knows what religious ideas believers might take from cosmology were they to imagine that in the beginning the universe began. The second aim is to account for the emergence of the universe in some way that will allow physicists to say with quiet pride that they've gotten the thing to appear from nothing, and especially nothing resembling a deity. This is the province of ideas first advanced by Stephen Hawking and James Hartle, and later by Hawking, Ian Moss, and Neil Turok. The details may be found in Hawking's best-selling A Brief History of Time, a book that was widely considered fascinating by those who didn't read it, and incomprehensible by those who did. Their work will seem remarkably familiar to readers who grasp the principle behind pyramid schemes or magical acts in which women disappear into a box only to emerge as tigers shortly thereafter. The argument that Hawking has offered may be conveyed by question and answer. From where did our universe evolve? Our universe evolved from a much smaller, much emptier mini-universe. You may think of it as an egg. What was the smaller, emptier universe like? It was a four-dimensional sphere with nothing much inside it. How can a sphere have four dimensions? A sphere may have four dimensions if it has one more dimension than a three-dimensional sphere. Does the smaller, emptier universe have a name? The smaller, emptier universe is called a de Sitter universe. Is there anything else I should know about the smaller, emptier universe? Yes. It represents a solution to Einstein's field equations. Where was the smaller, emptier universe, or egg? It was in the place where space as we know it did not exist. You may think of it as a sack. When was it there? It was there at the time when time as we know it did not exist. Where did the egg come from? The egg did not actually come from anywhere. If the egg did not come from anywhere, how did it get there? The egg got there because the wave function of the universe said it was probable. How did our universe evolve from the egg? It evolved by inflating itself up from its sack to become the universe in which we now find ourselves. This catechism, I should add, is not a parody of quantum cosmology. It is quantum cosmology. Readers lacking faith will, I imagine, wish to know something more about its crucial step, and that is the emergence of a mini-universe from nothing at all. They'll be disappointed to learn that insofar as the mini-universe is actual, It did not emerge from nothing, and insofar as it is possible, it did not emerge at all. What can be said about the mini-universe is that Hawking has designated it as probable because he's assumed that it is probable. He's done this by restricting the wave function of the universe to just those universes that coincide with the de Sitter universe at their boundaries. This coincidence is all that is needed to produce the desired results. The wave function of the universe and the de Sitter mini-universe are made for each other. The subsequent computations indicate the obvious. The universe most likely to be found down there in the sack of time is just the universe Hawking assumed would be found down there. Among philosophers concerned to promote atheism, satisfaction in Hawking's conclusion has been considerable. Witness Quinton Smith, quote, "Now Stephen Hawking's theory dissolves any worries about how the universe could begin to exist uncaused," end quote. Smith is so pleased by the conclusion of Hawking's argument that he hasn't concerned himself overmuch with its premises or with its reasoning. Alexander Vilenkin said, quote, "Sadly, quantum cosmology is not likely to become an observational science." Correct. Quantum cosmology is a branch of mathematical metaphysics. It provides no cause for the emergence of the universe, and so does not answer the first cosmological question. And it offers no reason for the existence of the universe, and so does not address the second. If the mystification induced by its modest mathematics were removed from the subject, what remains would not appear appreciably different in kind from various creation myths in which the origin of the universe is attributed to sexual congress between primordial deities. Arguments follow from assumptions, and assumptions follow from beliefs. And very rarely, perhaps never, do beliefs reflect an agenda determined entirely by the facts. No less than the doctrines of religious belief, the doctrines of quantum cosmology are what they seem: biased, partial, inconclusive, and largely in the service of passionate but unexamined conviction. There is no surprise in any of this, and if there is, there shouldn't be. His atheism notwithstanding, Richard Dawkins believes that he is a deeply religious man. He simply prefers an alien cult.
At some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto this planet.
Mock them, ridicule them.
Fred Hoyle advanced after studying the resonances of carbon during nucleosynthesis. The universe, he grumbled afterward, looks like a put-up job. An atheist, Hoyle did not care to consider who might have put the job up, and when pressed, he took refuge in the hypothesis that aliens were at fault. In this masterstroke, he was joined later by Francis Crick. When aliens are dropped from the argument, there remains a very intriguing question. Why do the constants and parameters of theoretical physics obey such tight constraints? If this is one question, it leads at once to another. The laws of nature are what they are. They're fundamental. But why are they true? Why do material objects attract one another throughout the universe with a kind of brute and aching inevitability? Why is space and time curved by the presence of matter? Why is the electron charged? Why? Yes, why? An appeal to still further physical laws is, of course, ruled out on the grounds that the fundamental laws of nature are fundamental. An appeal to logic is unavailing. The laws of nature do not seem to be logical truths. The laws of nature must be intrinsically rich enough to specify the panorama of the universe, and the universe is anything but simple. As Newton remarks, quote, "Blind metaphysical necessity, which is certainly the same always and everywhere, could produce no variety of things," end quote. If the laws of nature are neither necessary nor simple, why then are they true? Questions about the parameters and laws of physics form a single insistent question in thought. Why are things as they are? when what they are seems anything but arbitrary? One answer is obvious. It's the one that theologians have always offered. The universe looks like a put-up job because it is a put-up job. That this answer is obvious is no reason to think it false. Nonetheless, the answer that common sense might suggest is deficient in one respect. It is emotionally unacceptable because a universe that looks like a put-up job puts off a great many physicists. They have thus made every effort to find an alternative. Did you imagine that science was a disinterested pursuit of truth? Well, you were wrong. For the past quarter century, a very substantial portion of the community of mathematical physicists has been engaged in work on a subject known as string theory. The effort has consumed the best minds of a generation, whereupon the inevitable, wait a minute, strings? Yes, strings. A string is just what its name suggests. It's a wiggling one-dimensional object, something like a garden hose, although somewhat smaller, and extended in length but not width. Strings can be straight, they can be curved, they can join themselves to form loops, and what's more, since they're strings, they can vibrate under tension. In place of the very complicated system of precisely adjusted forces and parameters characteristic of the standard model, string theory pointed to two and only two fundamental constraints. The first reflected the string's tension, and so served as the key to its powers of creation, and the second, its coupling constant, the measure of how likely it was to break into two. Nothing more was needed. This was widely considered a very fine thing. In the end, string theorists argued that the extra dimensions of their theory were buried somewhere. At each point in space and time, they conjectured, there one would find a tiny geometrical object, and curled up within it, there one would find the extra dimensions of string theory itself. It was an idea that possessed every advantage except clarity, elegance, and a demonstrated connection to reality. With extra dimensions buried, stable solutions emerged from the equations of string theory, just as the physicists had hoped. They were not, unfortunately, unique. There were thousands of them, and each led to a different version of the theory, a point in an enormous space of possibilities, a landscape of a sort never seen before, a place where each point seemed to embody a different scheme of physical thought, and so a different universe governed by the scheme. In its appearance in various popular journals, the mutant thing was depicted as a gigantic set of bubbles floating in space. Our own universe, a dimpled dot lost somewhere amid that infernally expanding froth. String theory confronted the community of particle physicists with an exquisite dilemma. A theory that initially seemed too good to be true had, by the late 1990s, seemed too good to be true. This was widely considered monstrously unjust. If string theory did not uniquely describe one universe, physicists reasoned, the fault lay with our universe. It was not man enough to handle so promiscuous a theory. One universe having proved inadequate, more would be required. Endeavoring to unify the forces of nature, physicists determined to multiply the universes in which they were satisfied. Very few physicists appreciated the irony involved in pursuing the first ambition by embracing the second. The physicist Leonard Susskind thus claimed that, quote, the narrow 20th century view of a unique universe, about 10 billion years old and 10 billion light years across, with a unique set of physical laws, is giving way to something far bigger and pregnant with new possibilities, end quote. Far bigger? And pregnant, too? In service to this idea, Susskind wrote that, quote, physicists and cosmologists are coming to see our 10 billion light years as an infinitesimal pocket of a stupendous megaverse, end quote. On reflection, Susskind came to understand that the word megaverse carried negative class associations, whereupon he renamed the megaverse the landscape. The landscape at once suggested the radical changes to come. Quote, theoretical physicists are proposing theories which demote our ordinary laws of nature to a tiny corner of a gigantic landscape
of mathematical possibilities, end quote. Each of the versions of string theory is thus free to find its home in some particular universe. Like Odysseus worshipping in foreign temples, there's a universe in which a very large cosmological constant is made to feel welcome. The MIT physicist Max Tegmark is persuaded that this is so, and if in some universe he is persuaded that it is not so, he has learned to accept the emotional incoherence that would trouble others with equanimity. However named, the landscape was a provocative and even a revolutionary idea. The multiplication of universes establishes that in some universe, the fine structure constant will take any designated value. It's a sure thing. Nonetheless, the sure thing establishes only that life's lucky numbers will sooner or later turn up somewhere or other. And yet, they have turned up here, just where we need them the most. Requiring certain amenities, we find ourselves in a universe in which they've been liberally supplied. This may not be a paradox in thought, but surely it seems a suspiciously good deal. We might well have found ourselves in a far less agreeable universe, one in which none of life's lucky numbers were tuned to their sweet spot. And where would we have been then? Given sufficiently many universes, things improbable in one must, from the perspective of them all, appear certain. The same reasoning applies to questions about the laws of nature. Why is Newton's universal law of gravitation true? No need to ask. In another universe, it is not. The current of thought that animates the landscape says that, given sufficiently many universes, what is true here need not be true there, and vice versa. This thesis has been current in every college classroom for at least 50 years. It arises spontaneously in discussion, like soap bubbles in water. It's expressed in the same way and often by the same stolid, heavy-thighed undergraduate, a Mr. Waldberg, in my case in class. After raising his hand with the air of a man compelled to observe the obvious, he has this to say: "There are no absolute truths." Questions such as this reflect, in the end, a single point of intellectual incoherence. The thesis that there are no absolute truths, is it an absolute truth? If it is, then some truths are absolute after all, and if some are, why not others? If it is not, just why should we pay it any mind? It's odd that men who, as a group, are united by their conviction that religious beliefs are very primitive should find themselves disputing matters more commonly discussed in the Alpha Pi Alpha keg room. It is so, nonetheless, a point that the brothers find hardly surprising. Discussions on various internet postings are endless. Often they contain an eerie mixture of technical sophistication and philosophical incompetence, or the other way around. The willingness of scientists to explore such strategies in thought might suggest to a perceptive psychoanalyst a desire not so much to discover a new idea as to avoid an old one. Such things happen, and they happen even in mathematical physics. Writing with what I think is characteristic honesty, Leonard Susskind has this to say: "If, for some unforeseen reason, the landscape turns out to be inconsistent, maybe for mathematical reasons or because it disagrees with observation, I'm pretty sure that physicists will go on searching for natural or godless explanations of the world. But I have to say that if that happens, as things stand now, we'll be in a very awkward position. Without any explanation of nature's fine tunings, we'll be hard-pressed to answer the intelligent design critics. One might argue that the hope that a mathematically unique solution will emerge is as faith-based as intelligent design." This remark has an unintended daring. It gives a good deal of ground away. It's generous, and it suggests, oddly enough, that a conflict in thought that scientists have almost universally dismissed retains a strange, disturbing vitality nonetheless. Do not be misled by phrases such as faith-based as intelligent design. It's the word awkward that counts. If the double ideas of the landscape and the anthropic principle do not suffice to answer the question why we live in a universe that seems perfectly designed for human life, a great many men and women will conclude that it is perfectly designed for human life. and they'll draw the appropriate consequences from this conjecture. What is awkward is just that at a moment when the community of scientists had hoped that they had put all that behind them so as to enjoy a universe that was safe, sane, secular, and sanitized, somehow the thing they had been so long avoiding has managed to clamber back into contention as a living possibility in thought. This is very awkward. It is Western science that is our church, the place in which we repose our confidence and our trust. Darwin's theory of evolution is the obvious example, because Darwin's theory is virtually the only part of church teaching commonly understood. It may be grasped by anyone in an afternoon, and often is. A week suffices to make a man a specialist. The great virtue of Darwin's theory, Richard Dawkins has argued, is that it has made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Dawkins' claim, while it's been widely repeated, has not been widely believed. 2/3 of Americans, the New York Times reported, say that creationism should be taught alongside evolution in public schools. But even among those quite persuaded of Darwin's theory, quote, 18% said that evolution was guided by a supreme being. Under these circumstances, freedom of thought very often appears as an inconvenience to those with a position to protect and enemies on all sides. A paper published recently in the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington, D.C., concluded that the so-called Cambrian explosion, the sudden appearance of new life forms in the fossil record, could best be understood in terms of intelligent design, hardly a position unknown in Western thought. The paper was, of course, peer-reviewed by 3 prominent evolutionary biologists. Wise men attended to the publication of every one of the proceedings papers, but in the case of Stephen Meyer's The Origin of Biological Information and the Higher Taxonomic Categories, the board of editors was at once given to understand that they had done a bad thing. Their indecent capitulation followed at once. Publication of the paper, they confessed, was a mistake. It would never happen again. It had barely happened at all. Quote, "If scientists do not oppose anti-evolutionism," remarked Eugenie Scott, the executive director of the National Center for Science Education, "it will reach more people with the mistaken idea that evolution is scientifically weak." Scott's understanding of opposition had nothing to do with reasoned discussion. It had nothing to do with reason at all. Discussing the issue was out of the question. Her advice to her colleagues was considerably more to the point. Avoid debates.